Welcome to the Transformation Leaders Podcast. I'm Tony Lockwood and I'm delighted that you could join me on this latest episode. Each episode takes the form of a discussion with a leader who openly shares their experiences of leading organisations through the transformation journey. Today I'm delighted to be joined by David Estyn-Jones. After a career in the military, David moved into retail before transitioning into the world of change and transformation. Those early careers have influenced his approach in supporting both large and small organisations on the journey of transformation. I'm sure that you're going to enjoy this episode, especially David's view on leadership. Let me introduce you to David now. Hi, David. Welcome to the Transformation Leaders Podcast. It's great to have you on. Let's start, as we always do, by introducing yourself a little bit about your background and, more importantly, how you first got into change and transformation.
Well, hi, Tony, and firstly, thanks very much for asking me on the pod. Very excited to be here. So I'm David Estyn-Jones. I'm an interim consultant at the moment, and I've been doing that for the last 7 years, which means I get to work on a variety of different projects, different clients, and yeah, it's a very interesting career. Going back, I've got I suppose a fairly diverse CV, if you like. I started off after university as an army officer. I left after 10 years, went into retail, first in operations and then in project and program management. I then took about 4 years running a business out in the Middle East. And when that finished, I came back and had to think about what I wanted to do. And that was, when I started on my interim career, and really when I've had the most exposure to change and transformation. But to answer the question, how did I get into that? I think I had I remember my mum always tells me that I had a school report when I was young that said, David loves problems. If there wasn't a problem to fix, he'd go out and make one. And that's been something I've always remembered, because it's very true. You do all sorts of different roles in your life, and some are operational. You've got different functions, and particularly as an army officer, I did a bunch of different stuff. But the common thread was always, I'd look at an organisation or at a team and say, what are we trying to do and how can we do it better? And what do I need to change? What do I need to fix? And that's really something that carried me all the way through. I think there's one particular moment, though. I mean, the military career is quite interesting because your career is managed for you very much. You are sent to different places to do different things, and you have some choice, but there's a lot of it is done for you, if you like, in terms of your postings. When you leave that, very much you are on your own, and it's purely down to what you decide to do. And as I say, I started in retail. I used to run supermarkets and regions of stores as well. And that was okay. It was really interesting. It was hard work, and I got my head down and pushed through it. But there was a moment when I had a chat with my boss at the time, who said, who identified probably that wasn't really what I was going to be good at, but not be good at, but where I'd excel. And he mentioned that there was a team that was recruiting, which was a store development team, and they built new stores. They revamped stores. They knocked old ones down and put them back up again, and all that type of thing. And he said, have you thought about project management? And I'd probably always done that to an extent, but that was when you put a name to it, and then I went and had a chat, and I won't say the rest is history, but that was a sort of major turning point in my career. And almost overnight from starting that, things started to make sense, and I started to really enjoy it and then thrive and grow from there, I guess.
Oh, interesting. I think it is interesting just how many people almost fall into change and transformation by accident.
Yes.
Then once you're in it, you can't. There's no going back.
And I guess 20 years ago, probably people didn't talk about, or not that many businesses talked about, or organisations talked about change and transformation as such. They might have talked about project management. They might have done change and transformation, but they didn't necessarily put a name to it. So it's definitely something that's grown.
Yeah, absolutely. So we always start each pod asking one simple question. How do you define transformation?
How do I define transformation? Well, I would say I I would highlight the difference between change, which, change is a pretty simple concept. Something changes, and transformation is more fundamental for me. It's when you take an organization or an entity and you permanently change what it is, how it does things, the way it operates. So for me, it's far more than a gradual sort of slower process of improving and fixing things. It's saying, today we're this and tomorrow we need to be something else because the world has changed, or we need to take advantage of a new opportunity, whatever it is. So transformation is more fundamental. It's probably a bit more scary for people. And I think it's something, whereas most organizations can deal with the more steady side of change, some better than others, transformation is something where there's a lot more at stake.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And just going back to your introduction, really, and how you came about being in change and transformation, two distinct careers in terms of military followed by retail, both of are really interesting, I think, in their own right. Lots of different moving parts, some that you can control, some that you can't control.
Yeah.
But it'd be interesting just to explore what elements do you think that you sort of that you took out of your military career that made a difference in initially your retail career, but then moving forward within your change and transformation career?
That's a good question. I think the military is very good at teaching a number of things, but a couple that I'd pick out. One is about planning and the ability to give somebody an aim or an objective, and then let them get on and work out how they're going to do it. So I think that whole part about seeing a situation, weighing up all the different factors, and then working out what you're going to do, I think is something the military actually puts a huge amount of time into training, whether it's soldiers becoming junior NCOs as they move up the ladder, or in my case, the young officer going through Sandhurst, and then subsequently your ability to do that and look at a problem and say, what are the different moving parts, and how do we get out of this, or how do we push forward and achieve what we need to do. I think that's hugely important, and obviously that is something that when you come to, if we're talking project management, transformation, change, dealing with those sorts of things and planning through that is really important. So I think that's one thing. The other thing I'd say that the military is very good at teaching is leadership. And I met plenty of great leaders in the army, and plenty since, plenty of great leaders in civilian life. But I think particularly when you've got something that's stressful, something that involves change, your ability to lead really comes under scrutiny. And I think it's useful to have that background, but particularly in a few areas. Certainly, when people talk about leadership, I always think that the key part of it is being able to articulate a really clear and compelling vision of what you want to achieve. And when you're talking about change and transformation, the ability to explain what it is you're trying to achieve and what the future state is, I think is absolutely critical. So, great management is one thing, but if people have that vision in mind and they can see it and understand and buy into it, then actually any change or transformation initiative is going to be far more likely to succeed. So I would say those are the two things I always bring with me.
Yeah, it's interesting. We've had a couple of, probably about 3 or 4 people now throughout the series that had a military background, and the sort of the consistency in answering that question is amazing. But as you were just explaining and talking about the planning bit, what was going through my mind was that in reality, for obviously for many years, at that planning aspect, you've had to operate in that agile sort of world, I suppose. Before anyone even mentioned agile planning or agile project management, that was your life, wasn't it? Because you can plan to a certain thing, but presumably once you're on the battleground, shit happens, and you've just got to get on with it.
Well, that's the old thing of no plan survives contact with the enemy. And yes, absolutely. I think so. And look, I'll be clear. I was I left the army in 2003, probably after a fairly quiet career in terms of what I went and did. But even so, it's the way that you're taught to train and operate. And the other thing, and I was thinking about this the other day, is we tend not to overmanage, or certainly that's the way that we're taught. What happens in reality tends to change. But if you can bring great people into an organization and train them well and give them clear direction, you then hopefully don't need to overmanage them, because you're pushing them in the right direction. Yeah, and their training and their quality and all the rest of it will keep them pushing along. So you don't need to do it for them. And I think actually on any project, if you've got people like that, who, number one, you've brought good people in, you've trained them well, you've got a good strong ethos within the business. If you can point them in the right direction and support them and be clear on the direction, you don't then need to do. And I think that's the most effective way to lead and manage. I really do.
Yeah, I agree. And there's a saying, isn't it, that the best leaders are those that get a team around them that are better than they are.
Yeah.
And so many people feel that that's a threat to them and don't follow that. But actually, it's the biggest strength that you can have, and it makes your life a lot easier.
For sure, yeah. I think, the ability to work with experts and with people who know far more about a subject than you do is an interesting one, because, as you say, some people do see that as a threat, whereas it absolutely shouldn't be.
Yeah. So I was having a look at your LinkedIn profile earlier, and you describe yourself as helping clients to get shit done. I think you take out a couple of the letters, but I'm
yes,
that's what
there is an asterisk. Yeah.
So just tell me a little bit about what you mean, and what type of organisations do you typically work with, and what's been the main focus?
Yeah. So what do I mean by that? I'd say so some of it just comes down to the approach. I think it's, as an interim, you go into a company, you literally have a fairly short window to add value. I think if you're not doing that in a few days, then people will start to question you always. And that's just really my focus is at the end of the day, we want to do stuff. They want to do something, and you don't know what that thing is, but there'll be there'll be all sorts of things they want to do, and that's my role, is to help them do that. So hence the get shit done. But so that really is just a focus on the way of working. I'm not there to complicate anyone's life or slow things down or make things difficult. I actually want to be there to enable, because that's why they've got an interim in. So I think it's always really useful to do that. In terms of the approach, the other part of that I always say is about keeping things simple. And I think that's the beauty of being of going in somewhere new and fresh, is that there'll be bits you understand, there'll be bits that you don't. But as somebody coming in from outside, you can take a fairly cold, hard look at what's going on. And quite often when you're in the weeds and you're very emotionally invested in something because it's your business or it's your career and you've been there for years, it's far, far harder to be objective about it, because you've got all this legacy of emotional attachment and information that someone coming in from outside hasn't got. So I think it's far easier in some ways to say, once you understand the basics of what someone's doing, to say, well, actually, this bit, you're worried about this, but this isn't a problem. This is fine. You should be worried about this bit, and you've got to think about X, Y, and Z. And so that's really the approach, I'd say, in terms of going into any organisation.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, isn't it? I think as an external interim consultant going in, you've got the real advantage of being able to go ask all of the numpty questions. The questions that if you've got like 5-6 years behind you in an organisation,
yeah,
you'll never ask, because you're probably expected to know the answer. And it just allows the externals or those people who are prepared to ask those numpty questions to get to the core issue really, really quickly.
Well, and the key question I always ask, which always it can sound silly, but it is pretty important, is what are you trying to achieve? And you have this all the time with, yeah, we want to do X, Y, and Z. Fine. Why? What is it you're trying to achieve by doing all this? And sometimes people might think they know, but when you ask them to articulate that, it sort of comes unstuck a little bit, and it doesn't make sense. Particularly, say, for example, I've been working with a business that's about a year ago that was growing rapidly, and clients come to them saying, can you do X, Y, Z for us? And the natural inclination is, yes, of course. Okay, so why yes? Because actually that yes might be absolutely the wrong decision in this case, because that extra piece of business might jeopardize everything else and might actually, cause things to break. Not that you ever want to turn away business, but it might be absolutely the right decision. So what are you trying to achieve? And it might be less profitable by doing that because you're spreading yourself too thin and all the rest of it. So I think that's the key question, which again, people on the inside don't always want to ask. They'll probably think they know it.
It's funny you should mention that. I'm working with an organisation at this moment in time, and we've just had exactly the same situation. They're on a trajectory of massive growth. They've committed to a figure. They've just brought in some investment and external investors, which brings in the additional complications. And they've got this real quite big opportunity with this big global blue chip organisation. And we've sort of said, you've just got to say no. The timing's not right for you, because it'll distract you from doing this stuff that you need to get done. Because if you don't do that, you're not going to get the platform to the stage it needs to be to achieve the bigger the bigger growth in years to come. And it is that ability to look at things in the cold light of day, to say, let's stop and really make a conscious decision on whether it's the right thing or not. And that external view, I think, has helped with them, and it's helped so many times in organisations I've worked with.
Yeah, for sure. And you asked about the sort of clients I've worked with. I mean, the last 7 years it's been interesting, because I've worked with everyone from a publisher. I ran a car wash business in Europe, which was interesting. Learned a lot about how a car wash operates and some of the pitfalls. I've worked with the retailer, manufacturer, distributors, various other people in between. For the last year, I've been working with a company that it's a diagnostics business, so a sort of biotechnology business that saw an opportunity. It was a pretty small business, but then COVID came along and they pivoted, took the opportunity and started doing COVID testing. And so that's really been my life in various different ways for the last year, which has been absolutely fascinating, from a sort of operational and commercial aspect, but also because we've seen a massive ramp up of operations as more and more people have required testing. And then now we're seeing the other side of it, of actually how do you draw down a business as the requirements for COVID testing tends to go away. So a huge variety of different role and lots of different challenges along the way, and different sizes of organisation as well, which I think is interesting, because trying to manage transformation in a big sort of FTSE 100 is one thing. Trying to manage it in a small sort of privately owned $100 million or £100 million turnover business is something entirely different. So
which do you prefer, or which have you preferred?
It's a good question. I actually really enjoy that sort of small and medium-sized business, the probably 50 to 200 million size. I think they're interesting for me because they're big enough that they've got a wide variety of problems or challenges or opportunities. So there's stuff to do, but they won't. And if they're small because they're now growing and developing, they don't have huge teams of people there ready to do it. They don't necessarily have all the processes in place. There's a lot of stuff which is working out as you go along. So it's a little bit like the Wild West, but that's a very interesting place to be. And particularly any business that's growing fast is really interesting to be in, because so many different issues that come up there. One thing I I'm definitely not a sort of large ERP implementation type person, but I've worked on a couple of projects where that's been going on. And it's interesting because when you work in big companies, you take a big ERP system for granted. When you work in a company that's done everything with sort of QuickBooks and spreadsheets, and you start to grow and you start to want to mature in terms of how you want to see a P&L, but you haven't got a P&L, or you can't get one to hand. You've got to ask someone to specifically create that and show you that. It's a very, very different way of working. All those things you take for granted in a bigger organization, suddenly you haven't got. You got to sort of really adjust your ways of working, I would say.
Yeah, I tend to find it much more interesting working with those sort of mid-sized firms, because you almost get to touch every part of the business, don't you?
Correct. Yeah. Yeah.
And can have an influence and a more direct link with the senior team.
Yeah.
And then you can typically do in a big blue chip, global blue chip in particular. Yeah, it's fascinating. And as you say, those fast growth businesses that just need to almost catch up with the people, process, technology before they can go on the next wave of growth.
Yeah.
They're fascinating businesses just to stay with as well and ride that wave with them almost. So change is constant, as we know. Sort of competitive conditions, market conditions, disruptive technologies are coming about almost every bloody week now, aren't there? Something new's coming in, and you're always conscious of organisations going after the new shiny object or whatever. But as we know, true change and true transformation is a process. So what do you do to go about sort of establishing the right conditions and then maintaining momentum, to go through that sort of transformation phase?
Yeah, I think there's a few things. I mean, it will obviously depend on every situation. Every different client is different, but there's a few different things. One of the things that most people learn pretty early on is you need to have the right relationships with your stakeholders, and you need the right support. So whatever else happens, it's hard to make this work from the bottom up. You need that support from the top down. And I've seen cases where I was involved with a client a couple of years back on a big transformation program where they were going from very narrow distribution into something much wider to take an opportunity, take advantage of a specific change in legislation, and we're doing a lot of work towards that. And the program I was running to run this transformation really became the cornerstone of the strategy for 2020. And I had the MD was my sponsor, who was fantastic because we spoke regularly. He gave me a lot of time, and he'd always. I said, look, I'm always going to be straight with you. If we've got a problem, I'll never hide it. I'll be objective. I'll tell you what's going wrong. And he said, look, and the other thing you must do is always tell me what you need me to do. So we'd almost stage manage our governance meetings, and it was he'd always say, right, what do you need me to do? Do you need me to have a word or say something or whatever? And that when you've got that level of support, that is hugely important, I think, and it really helps other things to work well. The problem is where you don't have that, and sometimes you just don't. Sometimes you've got a leadership team who expect things to happen without getting too involved themselves, and that's a very different challenge. So that requirement to have that sort of senior support, those stakeholders in place. If you don't have it, I think it's a question of you don't want to be the boy who cried wolf, but you've got to call out where things are a problem. So communication, influencing all those relationships, your credibility going in, you've got to really, I think, pick your battles and communicate well. But you need people to take it seriously if they want it to happen. So that's probably one.
I think on that the added complication is where you've got a leadership team that a percentage of them don't necessarily agree with what you're attempting to do or driving forward, and there's that sort of breakdown in in the leadership team ultimately that the transformation program is really putting a light, shining a light on that discord really. That can be really challenging, I find.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's a classic stakeholder mapping exercise about the people that understand and support, and at the other end, the people who don't understand, don't support, and various different things. But actually, the hardest people are the people who understand what you're trying to do but don't support it. I remember learning this years ago was our natural tendency is to spend time with the people who understand and support, because that's nice and easy, and they'll sort of it all feels quite nice, warm and friendly. But actually you've got to really focus on who are those problem stakeholders. So and there might be good reasons why they don't support it, but you've got to spend time with them and really understand what their objections are, make sure they understand what it is you're trying to do and why. And work on that, because there might be very genuine objections that you're not going to overcome, so you just need to mitigate and put a plan in place. But I think that whole sort of stakeholder understanding, stakeholder engagement piece is probably one of the key things. The other thing I find, as I said, I sort of trained as a project manager many years ago. I'm not someone with loads of post-nominals and qualifications here. I know a reasonable amount about a number of different methodologies, but I'd like to think I'm not a slave to any of them. And I think some people can be and get very driven by methodology. I always find, and again, coming back to this point about get good people into the business, give them direction, and then almost just support them to do what they need to do. Again, the sort of approach to planning is, I think, needs to vary with each challenge, and sometimes you'll go in and you'll be very clear about I think certainly when I was less experienced, I'd be very clear on this is how we need to do this. This is the plan, and you've got to adapt and see what works. And actually, the governance structures you put in place might not work, so change it. If it doesn't work, there's probably a reason why it doesn't. The way you're doing planning or communication might not work, so again, maybe change that. So I think the sort of flexibility of approach without wanting to be too chaotic, I think there's a balance in there that actually you can't control every single aspect. Just try and work out the most appropriate way of doing things. Stick with that. Don't be afraid to change it if it's not working, and try and get that balance right, really.
Yeah, and I think the two I've seen examples where the two areas that we've just been talking about, the governance and the stakeholders, one's caused problems with the other for the other. So by being too prescriptive on the governance, it has actually inflamed situations with the core stakeholders, that actually one of the core issues that they've had was around the governance process rather than about what we're trying to do. And by breaking that down and, as you say, exploring what the challenges are, what the misunderstandings are, what the issues are in terms of what we're trying to do within the program. Once you understand it, you can do something about it.
Yeah.
Sometimes, as you say, you never go turn them around, and then you've got to manage that process in a different way. But if you understand what the issue is, or understand what their concerns are, you then have got an opportunity to do something about it, and that's all you can expect at this stage, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, and I was going to say change is always stressful. But then I realised I was talking to a military person, so change in an organisation can't be as stressful as being out there in guns being pointed at you, etc., etc. But it is. People find it stressful. It can be stressful running a big change program, but it is often very stressful for people that are going through that change. What type of things do you do to mitigate that? And from on your own side, what do you do to manage your stress levels?
I think so. Firstly, if I'm talking about I think it's really important to remove stress from the transformation or from the change, and particularly for the key people involved. I think what I try and do is always put myself in the position of the key people, understand their workload, their stresses, their how they're what's the impact of the change on them. And I think typically in any organization that's going through something fairly significant, you've always got that sort of half dozen key people who are the maybe the single points of failure that just are getting stretched to the max. And it's for me, there's a couple of things there. People need to understand the risks around humans, that so and so might be able to take on 150% of their normal workload for a time, but it comes at a risk and it comes at a cost. The quality of the work might reduce. They might burn out and really have a problem. They might decide that it's frankly not worth it and leave. And beyond anything else, it's not really the right thing to do to people is to ask them to do that. Now, we all have periods where we're working far beyond the max or beyond the normal, but I think understanding that side, and the other side is trying to protect people and do that in a couple of ways. One thing I am really very keen on is that people play to position. So people know who does what. We all have opinions. We all like to share our opinions, but let's not. It's one of the most stressful things when somebody is busy, has a lot of difficult work to do, but they also don't know who to listen to because they've got 5 different people telling them what to do. I tend to push back pretty strong on that, and tell people, leave them alone. This is what they've been asked to do. Leave them to get on with it. Make sure they've got the right support, and I think if people have that, then you've got the best chance of getting them through it in one piece. But that's not easy, and often you see that people are not well managed like that. Personally, always helps to have a plan. Always helps. It might have been the best time to do something 2 weeks ago, but the second best time is right now. So try not to procrastinate or put things off, and have that prioritized process, whether it's it's on paper, it's something more formal, or it's just in your head. What are the key things you need to do today to make sure that things work, and don't be afraid to change things if it's not working. But otherwise, I mean, good honest relationships with people always helps. Yes. Sometimes the ability to have a robust conversation where you let somebody tell you if it's all if it's all going wrong and what they think about it. That's good. You've got to get down to the human level and really understand how people are feeling about it, I think.
Brilliant, thank you. And we're coming towards the end now. We tend to end these podcasts with a sort of summary of what's the one thing, what's your sort of non-negotiable that you absolutely need to have in place for a program to be successful.
Difficult bringing it right down to one, isn't it? But
people cheat at times and give me 2.
Well, I'm going to give you a big catch-all thing, which covers a lot of different things, but it's all about leadership for me. And what I mean by that is you need, so as I said, leadership for me is setting that clear direction, a clear and compelling vision of the future, and then making sure you've got the right people involved and bringing them with you. And how you bring them with you, as I said, some of it is about giving them that direction, letting them do what they're best at doing, not interfering too much, not being afraid to change if things go wrong. But I think if you can do that, you've got the best chance of success. I think it's where leadership is lacking, and there may be people who have leadership titles but who do not act as leaders. Where generally you've got a problem. And I think if you've got that in place, there will always be things that go wrong. There'll always be things that change, and you'll have challenges along the way. But I think if you have that strong leadership from the start, you can probably ride most of the bumps and come out with a successful conclusion.
Yeah, you say, if they've got that absolute compelling vision and maintain that absolute focus, it's a strong baseline then, isn't it, on which to build your...
Absolutely, yeah. It's the foundation, yeah.
Absolutely. Well, thanks a lot, David. That was really great. A fascinating discussion for 35 minutes or so. We occasionally get questions asked, so if I collate them, are you happy if I pass them on to answer them to listeners that put anything through?
Yeah, of course, I'll do my best. So yeah, no problem at all.
Super. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
David, thank you so much for joining me today. There have been so many things that we have covered that are relevant to organisations and people undergoing change and transformation right now. Your focus on engaging with those stakeholders that may not be fully on board is something that many will take away from the session. The Transformation Leaders Hub is a community exclusively for those working in change and transformation. This exclusive peer group community offers unparalleled access to networking and career opportunities, as well as the latest industry news and insights. So whether you are looking to enhance your reputation, expand your network, or attract your next job opportunity, TLH is the ultimate resource. So check it out today. Bye for now.